This episode is brought to you by Learnly. For more information, go to learnly.me. Enjoy the show.
Teach me how to duck. Teach me how to duck.
Everybody love me. You ain't messing with my duck. I can teach you how to duck if it's Doug Wilson.
Let's get it. All right.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to Cross Politic.
That was a short intro.
Thank you for joining us. Before every show.
Not the intro I was expecting.
Oh, y'all want to do that? I could do the other intro, but that was pretty
Before
good.
every show, I ask Knox, what is our intro music? And he's like, it's the music that we always play.
Yeah.
He did the same thing to me.
It wasn't.
So
It wasn't.
we got an all-star lineup for you guys today. We got Al Mohler coming on. We got John MacArthur coming on. Phil Johnson coming on. And Pastor Doug Wilson is in the studio with us.
In the cheap seats.
In the peanut gallery.
Thanks for coming back. It's really good to have you.
Let me get your cup.
And so we're going to be talking about Shepherd's Conference, social justice. But
do
before
we have permission to talk about that?
we do.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
good.
Because
I just
Phil
wanna make
Johnson
sure.
retweeted Doug yesterday, and I took that as permission.
Okay, so we got license. to
Yeah,
talk.
so
Okay,
so
just
we're all
wanna make
good.
sure. I don't
But
wanna get the
before
show
we
pulled.
talk about social justice and the Shepherd's Conference, you guys got to come to Grace Agenda, April 5th through the 6th, and Pastor Wilson will be speaking. C.R. Wiley will be speaking. Nate
What is
Wilson
this?
will be speaking.
What does Starbucks have to do with cross politics?
Jankovic will be speaking. Ben
What is-
Merkel. Can I finish a sentence?
No.
Wow.
There's harsh rebuke that needs to happen at this moment.
But the conference is on raising kids, and that has everything to do with all the problems we're seeing in social justice.
Keep
You gotta
your
keep your
kids.
kids.
Amen.
Yes. Did you say that C.R. Wiley's coming?
Yes,
I wasn't
did.
listening
I did.
to you.
I don't think anybody's been listening to me this whole introduction.
No. No, but this is
Doug's been in the
I've
peanut
been
gallery
listening.
listening.
in Moscow, April 5th and 6th. It's a free conference.
Like Grace.
And you should come. We'd love to meet you, especially if you watch and listen to our show. It'd be great to connect with you. Come out to Grace Agenda April 5th and 6th. You can find out more about it, graceagenda.com.
All right, so we're going to talk about the social justice Q&A. It was online. It got taken offline.
Shepherd's Conference.
Shepherd's Conference. That's,
You said social justice.
Social
okay,
justice.
Shepherd. It's the same difference at this point.
Sorry, guys.
And it got the Q&A was online. It got taken offline, but we got a bunch of clips that we're going to kind of walk through and discuss. And we're going to start here.
Sort of the leftward drift, the liberalizing drift that affects not only politics but theology happens incrementally, but any reformation towards the right happens exponentially. Are you not concerned at all about the liberalizing drift of the social justice movement and all the rhetoric that goes along with that? I'm sure you are.
Yeah, the only offense I take at that is that I talk about this 5 times a week for 25 minutes.
Well,
So,
Ooh. And thus began a wonderful conversation.
That was Phil Johnson. I think that was so he had a couple nice tee-off questions at the very beginning, but that was his first question
that
getting
was
into.
getting started.
Get into
with
social
that.
justice stuff.
Yeah, getting into social justice stuff.
And the thing is I thought Phil did great, actually. And I think it was a real conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe kind of raw in places.
Yeah.
But really good. So but here, I want to frame this first of all. I want to ask a question to Doug and get this going. So you watched the Q&A.
I did.
You recently blogged about it as well.
Uh-huh.
Zoom out, first of all, sort of a macro question. What just happened, do you think, at the recent Shepherd's Conference? Maybe particularly zooming in on the Q&A, but then zoom out, given the social justice statement from last year, some of the differences of opinion over its helpfulness or usefulness, which seems to be, that was what was expressed in the Q&A. Do you think this is a significant moment in Reformed evangelicalism?
Yeah, I think it's very significant. One of the things that was apparent in the Q&A was how everybody up there thought and believed that they were all on the same page when it was manifest that they weren't. Right? So they've been accustomed to be singing off the same sheet of music for decades.
Right.
And all of a sudden, all these fault lines just appeared. Right. And you had all of a sudden, we can't go to this issue and talk about it and assume agreement will be on the other side.
Right.
Yeah. I thought it was a very enlightening Q&A. I thought it was probably one of the best Q&As I've seen in terms of actually imparting information
And actually dealing with real issues.
I thought Phil did great. I didn't think that Al Mohler lost his temper or anything like that. I thought they answered the questions
what were the fault lines?
Well, the fault lines have to do, it's an inescapable concept thing where the question was, why didn't you sign the social justice statement? The answer is, they gave various answers. Deaver said, I'm not a signer kind of guy. And Al Mohler said, basically, I would have liked to have had more input on something like this.
I would have said some things differently.
Signing this statement would have entailed me in a strategy that I'm not pursuing. So I think they answered the question, and I think they answered the question honestly and forthrightly. So I didn't have any complaints about that, not about Phil's questions or their answers. But boil it all down, the reason they didn't sign the statement is that they'd already signed another one. Right?
Uh-oh. Dun, dun, dun. I just heard that in my head. Okay. What's the other statement?
The other statement is there are scores of ways to sign statements. You blurb books. You appear at conferences. You write forwards to books.
You have MLK 50.
You have MLK 50. Those are all statements that you sign.
Yeah.
But they said they only signed confessions.
Right. But see,
and creeds.
For the average Christian out there watching the big names, we take a lot of things on trust. When I look at a book and I say, this looks interesting, I check the publisher
and who blurbed it, and
who blurbed it,
who published it.
So what I'm doing is I'm doing an informal triangulation. Who's with whom? I know
is
this
this likely to be worthwhile?
Yeah, and we go on the basis of these informal signed statements, blurbs, forwards, conference appearances, who you're associated with. Now, Al Mohler and all the guys on that panel have been historically associated with one another on the battle for the gospel.
And the fight against liberalism.
The fight against a particular strain of liberalism.
That's right.
All right. And what's happened is another strain of liberalism is making major inroads into the church. It's a different strain. It's another virus. It presents differently.
Right.
And a bunch of evangelicals are nervous about it. And Lig Duncan, Mark Deaver, and Al Mohler are not as worried about this new strain as John MacArthur and Phil Johnson.
Phil Johnson was so worried about it. He kept pushing the issue.
Right.
Play clip B. He kept pushing the issue about, but you're silent on this.
Right.
The evangelical movement and the social justice issue, particularly, I'm not talking about what happens in the world of politics, but I'm talking about what happens among our constituents and the rhetoric that's going on in places like T4G and the Gospel Coalition. You have been remarkably silent. It's one of those issues where I've only heard you speak on it in the Ask Anything sections when people ask you questions like I'm doing right now. And
yeah, I think the pushback is, I think that's what my whole life is speaking about. I mean, all my public ministry began dealing with these questions. So I do take a bit of offense, not personally, but I mean, I am not going to be forced into a Twitter conversation in 140 characters about these issues. I have been trying to lay out for 30 plus years an understanding of how evangelicals should engage the culture. And I cut my teeth apologetically confronting cultural Marxism and the entire network of issues of the left. You look at who I invite to my campus, you look at who I cite, you look at who I platform, I feel pretty good about the message that I'm sending there.
So those are his creeds. Those are his statements that he's signing. My platform.
Yeah.
Who I invite to campus.
Right. That's his way of signing things. And I think that's a fair thing for him to look. Who do I invite? I think those are fair indicators. But if I would have suggested one thing to Phil, I would say it's not reducing to a tweet or 140 characters to ask a question like, look, is woke a good word or a bad word? Is it good or bad?
But
to be woke.
Phil got in trouble. Phil kind of got in trouble for asking the questions he did ask. Had he asked that, who knows what would have happened to Phil?
Right.
But he asked good questions.
Look, Phil's an OG. He knows how to get around,
right.
and he knows how to be gracious and how to try with respect to communicate to a brother. So I don't have a problem with what Phil did at all. I do kind of feel like Al Mohler knew the end of those questions. and that they weren't just the question that was on the surface. I felt like he was responding, especially in that last clip, to something that was bigger than just, he was defending something that wasn't necessarily presented in the question by Phil, but it had implications
right.
to the point that he had to defend 35 years of his ministry.
Right.
You know,
well, let me back up just a little bit, because one of the things I wanted to know, Doug, you said a minute ago that you think this is a new virus of liberalism.
Yes. That
Dever and Duncan and Mohler are less concerned about.
Right.
It seemed to me in the Q&A that at least Mohler and maybe to some extent Duncan pushed back on Phil in passing comments like, we really are concerned about this too.
Yes.
But they seem to be almost pushing back and saying, but we're concerned about your approach.
Right.
And then there were several comments here and there about like, I'm not going to reduce it to a Twitter thing. You had
which no one was asking.
But you had like,
but he was talking about something
but you had
else.
Dever talk about, he gave a little story about apparently he ran into Pelosi on the airplane. He didn't name her, but I assume that's who he's talking about. Mohler later in the Q&A says, I need to give a fuller answer, the longer answer. It takes longer to establish, image of God, Darwinism, revelation. I mean, he gives this longer answer. He says, it just takes more time and it's a more delicate issue.
Right.
So my question is, do you think that's what, it seems like they might push back on you and say, no, we're not okay with this liberal virus. And we see that there is a liberal virus, but we think it takes a more surgical attack than the one that the social justice statement did.
Right. So the problem is you're going to be associated with somebody.
There's no neutrality.
There's no neutrality.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're either going to sign the statement, for example, or you're like Lig Duncan didn't, or you're going to write the foreword to
Woke Church
by Eric Mason. So if you write the foreword to Woke Church,
right.
Well, apparently woke is a good word. Right. Or it's at the very bare minimum, it's a word you don't mind being associated with.
Right.
And you mind that less than you would mind being associated with the social justice thing.
Wow.
So Lig Duncan would rather have his name as the forward to Woke Church than to have his name on the social justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that tells you that that's the fault line that I'm talking about. That's the fissure.
Right.
So,
And Dunk would say, his reply would be, again, based on his words in the Q&A, maybe we're going to play do you have the clip where he talks about standing on the word of God and not being swayed by, trying to cull curry favor with the world? Do you have that one?
My concern on racial issues is that I do not drive our grandchildren into the arms of the LGBTQIA issue. Where already our younger people don't want to touch that issue because they know that it immediately marginalizes them. So one thing I want to make sure I do is I want to look hard at my own tradition and my own tradition's failures with regard to the communion of the saints, the image of God in man, loving our neighbors, and look hard at where we failed, own up to that, so that I don't, the argument that's out there. The church's failure in LGBTQIA area, not to affirm it, is just like its failure in the area of slavery and segregation. I want to break that argument apart. And I want to say slavery and segregation was a failure of biblical fidelity. Caving into LGBTQIA affirmation is also a failure of biblical fidelity. And where I'm standing there because I'm standing on the Bible. And not because I'm trying to curry the favor of the culture, but because I want to tell the church, don't seek the favor of the culture. And that means you have to say no to the culture where it's wrong, and then you can say yes to the culture where it's right, not because the culture said it, because the word said it.
Right. That's exactly what I was wanting to grab. So I'm assuming that if he were sitting here, the comeback to you would be, the reason why I'm willing to associate my name with Woke Church and not with social justice statement is because I think on this issue, he says, I'm not trying to curry favor with the culture. And he goes on to say that's ridiculous and you might as well become an atheist if you do
it's
that.
impossible.
But apparently his argument is that what Eric Mason is doing with woke church is closer to biblical truth and biblical fidelity than social justice statement.
And so
I think
yes, and that's the point where I would say, okay, men, you're all inerrantists, right?
Yeah.
You affirm the inerrancy of the Bible and everything that it teaches. And so I would say, let's have a Bible study.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a Bible study. So was Philemon a Colossians 4:1 master? Right? Masters, remember you have a master in heaven.
Right.
And was John Broadus, one of the founders of Southern Seminary, a slave owner?
Yeah.
Did he follow Paul's instructions to slave owners? Let's say you're in a slave owning society, wasn't your idea. I've got all kinds. Right. I think we'll get there. We'll get there. So here you're in this situation. Thomas Sowell points out that slave owning is ubiquitous in human history. It's just slave owning is the way human beings do things.
Uh-huh.
And Western culture, uniquely among civilizations, revolted against the slave owning culture and did away with it, and is somehow uniquely blamed for it.
Even though we've abolished it.
Even though we've abolished it, and 3 cheers for abolishing it, etc. But in the meantime, when you're in the middle of it,
right.
When Paul sends his letter to Colossae, he doesn't start an anti-slavery society.
Right.
He plants churches, and he plants churches with a gospel logic in them.
Right.
Okay.
Which inevitably leads to the abolition of slavery.
Which leads necessarily to the abolition of slavery. Right. No quarrel with that. But not in a revolutionary way.
Right.
Not in the way that the woke progressivists want to do it. So
no kill Whitey movement, huh?
No.
Okay. All right.
That's bad.
All right.
I know that in saying that's bad, there's an apparent conflict of interest I might have.
But it's bad.
But it's bad.
So does that mean, though, that these guys are? I mean, why then? I mean, again, we take them at their word. Duncan says, I want to stand on the word. I want to be faithful to the word, fidelity to the word. Don't curry favor with the world. We can't curry favor with the world. It doesn't work.
And then I say, let's open the word.
Okay.
So in the New Testament, there are more passages on master-slave relations than you have on marriage.
Oh.
We have all kinds of explicit teaching on how to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when Al Mohler just recently apologized for the founders of Southern Seminary.
Yeah.
The apology had to do with the mere fact
that it was
of slave owning.
Right.
That's right.
It didn't have to do with
whether it was biblical or not, how they function,
or they beat their slaves, or rape the slaves, or anything like that.
And so visit the Washington Monument while you can. Right. Because of the Jefferson Memorial, or because this is all part of a consistent push. If as soon as someone says, look, we have to make a distinction between good, decent men who were slave owners and trying to make the best of a bad situation,
right,
and then the bad Simon Legree types. As soon as you make that distinction, by definition, you're not woke. You're the enemy. You're
right.
But that means that the New Testament as it stands is an anti-progressivist, anti-woke book.
Wow.
So the New Testament ain't woke.
Right.
Okay, but here's the thing that bothered me the most in that whole conversation, that's a lot of what's underneath it. But just the first part of what Ligon Duncan said, I can't imagine him saying that about any other topic or subject that they've had to face in the last 20 years.
Like what?
Against
Like, what do you mean?
If they were talking about the emergent movement and they said,
well, they brought that up.
But he would never say that about that movement. He would never say, guys, we're going to lose our youth. I don't want to drive our children to the emergent movement. So what I want to do, it's like, wait, hold on. You're the guys who would say, hey, how about you sit up there, stand up straight, preach the gospel into the situation, and let God deal with the fallout. That's what they kind of guys they used to be.
Right.
But nobody is not saying that.
And is the comeback, again, I want to, imagine them sitting here in the room. Is the comeback, yeah, but the emergent guys, they were going soft on, the deity of Christ and the Trinity and they weren't even Calvinists, and they weren't even sure about the inerrancy of the word.
But when the emergent movement started, it wasn't clean, crisp, cut lines.
No, it wasn't.
But what happened? Mark Driscoll was a part of it. Matt Chandler.
See,
right? But the problem, but what happened was
the patriarchy.
But I think part of what happened was people started fighting on it, and clarity started happening.
Wait, so you're saying that fighting is helpful?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's so awkward.
Well, it's about to get a lot more awkward. When we come back, we're not done. Is this stream still up? Is it possible? I just want to make sure that people can still watch this stream.
Facebook just closed us down.
Like and share while you can. We don't know if this stream is still up. We don't want to
save this, cash this.
More Cross Politics when we come back, talking about the Shepherd Conference Q&A. It gets dicier.
With Pastor Doug.
If you are a homeschooler, we have an app for you. Check out Learnly.me. With Learnly, you can capture your family's learning experience anytime, anywhere, and it's all pushed into a digital portfolio that allows you to create classes, grade work, a family learning experience, and generate transcripts all with a single click. Something all homeschoolers should be doing. And for Cross Politic listeners, use discount code LearnlyCross to get 50% off the first 3 months on a monthly subscription plan on top of 30 days free. So head on over to learnly.me/crosspolitic. That's learnly.me/crosspolitic.
At Logos Online School, we believe learning should be accessible. Homeschooling shouldn't stop you from staying connected. Enjoy classmates from across the United States and the whole world, coming at you 4 days a week and 32 weeks a year. We believe learning should be engaging, a group of like-minded students who love God and their classmates. Learning should also be customized, with more than 50 different classes offered throughout the day. Take one class or join us full-time. We believe learning should be inspired. Our knowledgeable instructors enthusiastically engage the students. The goal? Hearts that love learning. Lastly, learning should be affordable. Committed to making Christian education reasonable for all families. From $620 per class for an entire year to $2,232 per year for full-time students. The best option on the market. Join us at Logos Online School.
We're still here! I think.
Our midweek fix broke Facebook yesterday.
Did it?
Yeah. No, not really.
Like, share. Welcome back to Cross Politic. Pastor Doug, Shepherd's Conference Q&A discussion.
I don't think there's any difference theologically with where we all stand. And we've navigated that together on every possible platform in every situation. How we respond to the culture around us and the pressures that come on us from the culture, how we navigate those relationships that face us. I get a lot of, and even with this Shepherd's Conference coming up, I got a lot of heat from people on the internet who I don't, somebody has to show it to me because I don't go there. But that you were going to be here because you may have expressed yourself differently on the issue of social justice or whatever other issue it might have been. That seems to be the buzz button anyway. And I said, look, these are my friends. These are men I love. These are men who serve Christ. They've given their life to Him. God has given each of you guys a formidable place in the kingdom, and you've all had an impact on my life. I'll fight error, but I don't fight my friends. Why would I do that? I don't want to become an island.
Because we need to.
So this is what I want to follow up on is when Phil Johnson actually shared your blog post op on the
what was it, Sushi at Flying J?
Yeah. That was good. I would never eat that.
He said, here's Doug Wilson's autopsy on that train wreck of a Q&A at ShepCon 2019. So my question to you is, do you think the Q&A really was a train wreck?
No. I thought it was informative and enlightening, and some people may have been unhappy with it, but I think that would not the people trying to utilize a Q&A to find out what's going on.
Right.
That's what Q&As are for. Right. I think that it was a very illuminating Q&A. I thought it was.
Do you think we need to have more conversations like this or fewer?
Oh, way more.
Yeah.
Way more. And if I could riff on what John MacArthur said at the end, you don't have the luxury, we don't have the luxury of fighting disembodied error. Right.
Yeah.
Error never floats up to your front door in a little wispy cloud. It's people.
Yeah,
so Paul warns the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, men will arise from among you and lead people off. Wolves. And then there are people, some heretics, people who start dabbling in things they shouldn't.
Right.
Can be some of the nicest people you ever met. And you have to distinguish what they're saying, the poison they're bringing, and their personal gifts and graces that they might have.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend who's a pastor down in Mexico. He's a Reformed pastor down in Mexico, and he was actually raised up in the PCA. And this was actually this past week, and he was just lamenting how the Presbyterian Church is not fighting, and pastors aren't actually fighting through all the problems going on in the PCA Church.
Right.
And he said, I think a bunch of PCA pastors are just eventually going to leave and start their own denomination. And to me, that would even be more scary. You just had a bunch of pastors who disagreed with how the PCA was handling women deacons, social justice, LGBT issues in the church. And they're conservative, they're godly men, and they're right, they're biblical on these issues, but they aren't going to fight the PCA on it. They're going to go start their own denomination, and then they start their own denomination, and then they don't fight again.
Yeah, rinse and repeat.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Every 20 years, start a new denomination.
Right.
Because they refuse to have hard conversations with one another.
So I think we need way more of that kind of gracious. Phil Johnson was gracious, but straight up the middle.
This is something that I was telling you guys, isn't this obvious, though, that we haven't been having these conversations because
we aren't practiced.
While it's not that really big to us, it's huge to evangelicalism.
Big Evo.
That these guys would actually have some riffs that they haven't worked out. And this is the first, really. I was telling the guys 20 years ago, I came in probably 2004 to Reformdom. And when I came in, these guys were the pillars. These guys were, they've been going before I got here, but this was unified. Sproul was a part of it. You had Piper, and this was the big guys fighting all liberalism.
Right.
And in 20 years, we had never seen these guys disagree. The biggest thing to hit this circle was when R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur talked about baptism. And not even debated each other. They just presented their positions at the same time.
At the same conference, right?
Conference, the same day. And it's no talk back and forth. No. I'll present, you present. That was the biggest, 1997. That was the biggest thing to happen in this. Okay, what's going to happen here? This transcends that.
And that's kind of that's great. That's helpful. And I think bring it back to, again, sort of, I wonder if there's I think there's theological rift going on. And fissures, but it seems to me like there's also a rhetorical thing also going on, where this reluctance to fight with your friends, in a godly way, in a Christian way, not a nasty way. I mean, we don't have that option. I mean, but we're Christians. We have to have the fruit of the Spirit always, but error is not disembodied, and the whole idea of we quote the verse all the time, as iron sharpens iron.
Right.
And then there's one spark and everybody's like, whoa!
Yeah, exactly.
And when Paul confronted Peter at Antioch, over the issue of to his face
in public,
he was confronting someone who had the authority to write scripture, and who subsequently wrote 1st and 2nd Peter, right, and was behind the Gospel of Mark. Paul's confronting someone whose stature was way higher than anyone on that platform that we're just watching, and yet it was a good thing to do.
And it was, that was a full-on rebuke. He wasn't even just asking.
In the cafeteria.
It was not a Q&A.
Yeah.
It was a rebuke for hypocrisy.
Exactly.
Right.
And later on in 2 Peter, Peter's going to reference Paul's letters and affirm them and say, don't, wicked men twist them to their own destruction.
Yep. He defends Paul.
He's defending Paul. They're clearly on the same page. Yep. And so arguably it was because, in part, the early church thrived and was as healthy as it was because Paul loved his brother enough and did not think highly of himself, and knowing that you could be spun in the early church blogosphere as Paul, uppity Paul, rebukes Peter.
When you're going to do this, you're having this conversation. Okay, am I going to be that guy? Yeah. I guess somebody's got to be that guy.
Yeah,
and here we go.
That's the role you're going to play.
And long before you get to that public thing, it seems to me that we have to be practicing faithful friendship and churchmanship at much lower levels. If we're not used to going at it with each other to some extent, saying, "But what do you mean by that?" or "That doesn't sound good," or "Why did you say it this way?"
Right?
Isn't there a proverb about the wounds of a friend?
Yeah, faithful are
faithful.
But why wasn't? Okay, all right.
And the proverb continues: "Deceitful are the kisses."
Oh yeah,
of an enemy.
Yeah,
so there's a unity that is, there's a
It's
unity
wicked.
that's wicked. It's bad.
So it seems like this is like indicative of a church that is going soft. If we can't fight well with each other, then we're going soft.
I mean, you read Calvin and Luther. I mean, and those guys are fierce.
And Luther and Zwingli.
They've been long gone in the SBC and PCA.
Yeah, although I think Luther could have been well advised to tone it down.
Hear that? Doug Wilson says Luther could have toned it down.
So here's what
if you want to know where my limits are.
Luther went too far.
Yeah, somebody needs a little more Luther. Anyway, here's why Dever didn't sign the statement.
Is because you declined to sign the statement. What in it would you consider to be wrong?
Well, just for me personally, I decline to sign almost every statement. If you've ever seen me sign a statement, there's a story behind that. I'm just not a big statement signer guy. So I didn't memorize the statement. Yeah. I did read the statement. I read an earlier draft of the statement that I had a number of disagreements with. When the final statement came out, it was much better. I would certainly be in broad sympathy with the statement. If there are particular sentences in there I don't agree with, I don't remember what they are.
Okay.
What knocks?
You have a thought?
I don't know these guys who are talking right now. I don't know them. I don't know this Dever. I know the Dever who would have read something.
He signed the Nashville statement.
Well,
did he?
Yeah, he did.
I know the guys who would have read something and would have say, okay, these are the things that I didn't like about it generally, and would have been able to speak about it.
And you're saying, but the fact that he says, I don't remember it,
right,
and I can't really speak to it.
Doesn't really speak to it. I mean, even before this, it got really awkward when Phil Johnson said, how far are we apart?
And there was this awkward silence.
Us between you. Yeah. It was like, well, I don't know these guys. I know these guys to be sharp, articulate, big brains, can recall stuff off the top of their head and quote massive pieces of material.
Right.
I don't know this guy.
So my take, reading between the lines, I'm curious what your take is, Doug, but later on, I don't know if we have this clip, but later on, he tells the story about a black family in his church.
Yeah, we do.
When I was talking to one family in our church, and they were explaining to me what it was like for they're African American, for their two sons to get their driver's licenses in Illinois. And the mom was explaining to me that when they got their driver's license, they had a very serious conversation. They sat them down in their living room and explained, son, this license could get you killed. And they didn't mean because of driving, fast, and the kids didn't drink. It's because you could be shot if you don't do exactly what you're told. They weren't on TV. They weren't on CNN. This was a Christian family in their living room with a matter of utter seriousness, that it's parents loving their kids. I've got family after family after family after family that, with no malice, not trying to do anything politically, recounts their experiences like that. So that's the world that I live in as a pastor. And I think the Christian gospel has tremendous resources to learn from and to help and to push and to help us as a whole understand things like that, listen to each other, and as our church covenant says, bear each other's burdens and sorrows.
So my reading between the lines, my take, hold those two clips together of Mark Dever, is that the reason why he didn't sign the social justice statement is because he felt like it was not pastorally sensitive to families like that in his church.
Yeah.
Is that with you?
I think that would be a fair supposition. Right. I don't think, we can't prove it.
Right.
But you can't prove it, but it's
holding it together, something like that. So you made a face.
I don't understand why those two have. I signed the statement, and I'm that kid that had that talk from his mother.
Yeah. Right.
I'm that father that's going to have that talk with his son.
That's because you're not woke.
Yeah, but I hold those two worlds together because of the reality of it, and I want to sign the statement that talks about what the Bible actually says about justice and righteousness and truth, and at the same time understand the world that we live in, apply biblical theology to that world.
So, David, talk to Mark Dever right now. Seriously, I want to hear you. I want to say, so what would you say to Mark Dever? You told me,
don't go driving in Illinois.
Wild black. Have your white friends drive you around.
So you've told me stories about times where you've been pulled over and
and got wrongly arrested
and harassed by police. So you know exactly what this family's talking about that Mark Dever's dealing with.
Yeah.
And so talk to him and explain to him why he should not think that it's unpastoral for him to sign something like the social justice statement.
I guess I would like to know a little more about if that connection actually exists and what it is in there.
Okay, just for the sake of argument.
But here's the deal. I have no problem. I'm a theonomist.
Really?
I'm a theonomist.
Really?
I hold God's
shock.
I hold God's law in high esteem.
Yeah.
And I think if I train my son in a way that honors God's law and standards and teach him to respect authority and how to act with authority and how to engage in authority, and teach him to understand how the world might look at him, then I, as a parent, can ward off, like my mother did with me, the ability for somebody to come and say, oh, he's like one of them other black kids. And then hear him talk and hear him respect authority and hear him say, and the police officer, and it doesn't work every time. I know, I've been there, I get it. But the police officer has to say, okay, maybe he's not the kind of kid that I thought he was. Maybe he removes the option for the police officer or anybody else for that matter, any person of authority who thinks that he's like one of those thugs. It removes the ability for them to think like that about him. And I've had to face that my whole life. And every time, thank God for a godly mother who taught me how to respect authority, how to honor God, that I can remove those cultural identities that people want to place on me and warn me favor with those people.
If I could throw something in here, just a random thought. So people everywhere make prejudicial assessments. They think individuals think like insurance companies do.
Right.
A risk assessment.
It's a risk assessment.
Right.
If you're on a subway in a big city at 2 a.m. for whatever reason,
sure,
and you're going down the steps and you see a couple of guys leaning against the wall, okay, and they happen to be black, wearing hoodies, do you speed up? Do you slow down? What do you do at 2 a.m. if you're thinking like an insurance company, right? Now that can be taken as a cause of offense, but if it is a couple of white guys in grateful, in Hell's Angels jackets and chains.
White people
hanging
got
off.
thugs too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we need to show you around,
or a couple of Italian guys with their hairs greased back and
in other words,
trench coat.
There are things that the insurance company in your head processes. So if it's a couple of black guys with briefcases, ties, coming back from the office late, you do a completely different risk assessment. And the white guys in the motorcycle gang outfit get the get the risk assessment treatment. Yeah. Now there are bigots where the black skin alone will do it. Right. There are people like that.
True.
Right? That's true. But it's also true that cops will pull white 19-year-old teenage drivers, males,
in their mother's minivan,
in their pull them over simply because of their age. So one of the things that we have to recognize is that human beings generalize, and we generalize,
and we're embodied.
We're embodied, and you have to make decisions about the world. Based on,
I don't disagree with that. I just know that there's situations that I can't get out of that teen in that minivan can get out of.
Correct, and there are situations that you can get out of that he can't.
Not in that situation. I mean, if we're at the mall or something, I don't know. If we're in the hood,
but I think are you talking though about
not
like
if you pull your intersectionality cards?
But I think that's what he's talking about. Are you talking about the idea of that like everybody's so worried about necessarily offending a black man in some ways that maybe you have a certain kind of privilege because of the heightened awareness?
Yeah.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that Vody was at the panel, so maybe he can talk to Dever. Could you play that clip by Vody Bakum?
I can't find it. Oh, he wasn't on the panel.
Vody? Wasn't he one of the authors of the social justice statement?
Yep.
Wasn't he at the Shepherds Conference?
He was.
Oh.
Vody!
It was a white man's panel.
It was a segregated panel.
I mean, but where was Vody at? I mean, wouldn't he be a perfect person to speak on the subject?
Well, if you wanted the Q&A to be more awkward than it was.
But the whole goal is to show unity, right?
Right. So this is the thing. Let me pull back to the macro vision. When one of the reasons why Martin Luther King got as much traction as he did when he did is because white America had a really bad conscience. Right. They
knew there was a lot of stuff that was wrong.
They knew there was a lot of stuff that was manifestly wrong. Restroom signs, drinking fountain signs. They weren't
blind.
They weren't blind, and they had if you were a regular person, not a deeply dyed bigot, you were hard pressed to defend any of that.
Right.
And so white America had a really bad conscience about all of that. And so when Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream and judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, that resonated with all kinds of people where they said, yeah, you got that's a good point. That really and it was just aside from all the places where we might differ with this or that or the other thing, there was a center there that was good and healthy. Where we are now is just inflaming things. At some point in there, I think Phil made the point that race relations are worse now after 20 years of racial reconciliation.
Yeah, by the government.
With this, after 20 years of this, we're like the woman in the Gospels who the more the doctors treated her, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
We're making things worse. And we're making things worse because we're trying to do it apart from Christ, right? We're trying to say, look, white people, black people, all of you Scythians, barbarians, you need to drop it. You need to put your Jesus coat on, and you need to love one another, accept one another. We're rebooting, we're starting over. This is a new humanity. And that's the gospel message. As soon as you get sucked into reparations and going back and digging up old bones, you're never going to be done. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Wow.
And so, and I've seen this, I heard it, talk at Desiring God one time, Loritz.
Carl Loritz.
Brian
Loritz.
Well, Brian Loritz is the younger. Is it Crawford Loritz? The dad.
I think that's right.
And he told stories of, Jim Crow America that it's just heartbreaking kind of things. Yeah. And he did it without bitterness or angst or, it was just, it was a godly, gracious, good, healthy gospel thing.
Wasn't trying to get hooks in somewhere.
But then his son is far more eggy.
Oh yeah.
Right. Than the dad. So the dad who went through all this stuff
has grace in his heart.
Has grace in his heart. And the people who've had their grievances fed, right? We're feeding your grievances. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Right. Now that we're out of Jim Crow and out of all the segregation stuff, we ought to be doing better.
But
we're not.
Okay, so when I think about that, there's some father stuff going on there too when I think about that, because when I see, I fell in love with Jesus because I watched my mom and my dad love Jesus. And I wanted to love the God of my father and my mother. But when your son comes up in a way that has a form of bitterness to the system that keeps being edgy, as you said, isn't there part of bitterness from watching his dad engage that stuff that makes him feel like I'm not going to do that when I get older?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that's something, watching that go on over a period of time can form some bitterness and anger that why do we have to go through this? Why do we have to deal with that?
Yeah, what we're doing is we're taking offense by proxy.
Right.
So there's a great section in The Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis where the clevers are a group of people who are disillusioned by the war. And the protagonist says, but it was your fathers who went through the war, and they're the ones who had all those experiences, and you don't have any. How can you be disillusioned by the war when they came back from the war and settled down and are living ordinary lives? Well, it's because we want to advance ourselves, and people are taking the racial hustle grievance industry in a time when it works, and they're using it to get ahead. They're using it to advance their individual careers, and you need dissatisfaction and bitterness and resentment in order to make that work. The gospel cuts clean through that So there's the reason people don't want gospel reconciliation is that it actually reconciles.
It kills the industry.
It kills the industry.
Yeah, I got to let go of something. Actually, I have to give up this thing that I'm holding on to.
Right.
Wow.
All right, when we come back, I want to ask you, we're going to get some... I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to save it for the break. We're going to come back with, get you some trouble when we come back with Cross Politics.
I want to ask him something, too. Okay. I got something for him.
All right.
You having fun yet?
Yeah. I'm Mormon to the subject.
Classical Conversation supports homeschooling parents by cultivating the love of learning through a Christian worldview in fellowship with other families. We provide a classical, Christ-centered curriculum, local, like-minded communities across the United States and in several countries, and we train parents who are striving to be great classical educators in the home. For more information and to get connected, please visit our website at classicalconversations.com. Classical, Christian, get connected, get community.
If you need a little red meat in your diet, Pastor Doug Wilson.
They want to keep the government out of our bedrooms. What are they talking about? I built my house, which means I built my own bedroom. The government told me how far apart the studs had to be in my bedroom wall. They dictated how thick the sheetrock had to be. They mandated how far apart the sheetrock screws had to be. They had policies on the configuration of those sheetrock screws. They have laws on the size of the windows and what kind of glass I can have in them, and there are stern legal warnings on the mattress tags. What do you mean you want to keep the government out of our bedrooms? The president is probably contemplating right this minute the establishment of a bedroom czar.
To enjoy more red meat of this kind, check out the podcast on iTunes, or for more blogging of this particular nature, blog and Mayblog at DougWills.com. Kind of sticks in your teeth, don't it?
Hey-ya!
No.
I missed it. Missed it again.
That was as bad as the Shepherd Conference Q&A game.
Is that a little bit of white boy rhythm?
Yep.
That was
How racist of you.
woke at all. Welcome back to Cross Politic. With us in the studio today is Pastor Douglas Wilson.
We call it cracker rhythm.
We are talking about the Shepherds Conference Q&A 2019 and whether or not we are woke.
And why people should be coming to Grace Agenda Conference.
And why you should come to Grace
Don't forget
Agenda.
about that. April 5th
Because
and 6th.
our Q&A is going to be lit.
We're going to have we got a boxing ring placed right in the middle of the
It's going
stage
to
with
be
some gloves.
legit.
So here's something that I noticed through the whole Q&A. One of the big things that's been behind John MacArthur and Grace to You and kind of this whole movement, even that Together for the Gospel and the Gospel Coalition came out of, notice the two names, Together for the Gospel Coalition, is that their main message has been to preach the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to preach the gospel, and everything will fall out where it needs to be. We're engaged too much in culture and politics. We just need to preach the gospel. That's been kind of like the driving theme. But I didn't hear that come up one time in the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was arguing we just need to preach the gospel. That term never once appeared. And I'm wondering, because of that idea, the whole idea of preach the gospel has almost been used to get away from political engagement in one sense, or that the gospel implication has fallouts all the way to politics. It's just kind of been like, let's just stay in this little circle, in our little bubble, and that's what we're going to do.
The worst spin of that has been
the worst spin. But even the guys who are at the center of it have tried not to engage with secularism. Like they don't want to engage the politics in one sense.
John MacArthur's avoided that for years until Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are running.
Even on the issue of black culture and black people and the stuff that they've gone through, his response really has been, we just need to preach the gospel. That's what we need to do.
Right.
That wasn't anywhere in this Q&A. And I'm wondering, have they backed themselves into a corner in one way because they've refused to be biblical law about this whole thing?
Yeah, I think that's a really astute question, and it makes me think of I don't know if y'all are familiar with Robert Conquest's Laws of Politics. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
So his Robert Conquest, his second law of politics is any organization that is not explicitly right wing is sooner or later going to be left wing. Okay. So the just preach the
it's like
gospel.
A natural law kind of thing.
Like the natural current.
Yeah.
Is flows
to the left.
Phil kind of talked about that. Can't you see the drift? Can't you see
incrementalism?
Incrementalism is the pull. There's the pull goes that way inexorably. And what has happened is in the John MacArthur world, it's like we will have all kinds of theonomy that's off budget under the table. Okay.
Like what? Like what?
Like basic, the social justice, resistance to social justice, foolishness, anti-communism,
formal conservatism. Actually, right?
So the moral majority, Jerry Falwell's type of Jerry Falwell's senior, his world was we just preach the gospel, and all this conservative politics. Well, that goes without saying. That's common sense.
Right.
That's self-evident.
Right.
Okay, so we don't need to make that part of our confessional identity. Right? We can just preach the gospel, and all the cultural engagement that I would applaud most of it. Yeah. All the cultural engagement is off budget. We don't
not explicitly tied to the gospel.
It's an informal establishment of Christendom. So all
except abortion.
Well, they would say explicitly tie that.
Okay.
Maybe the one exception.
Abortion is the only thing we will preach directly about on our pulpit.
Well, that's what I think. Abortion is what woke that moral majority up.
The moral majority is woke.
So what they did was Francis Schaeffer and his activism back in the day. He started saying, "Look, people, you're preaching the gospel." Has implications for things like abortion, for things like pornography, for things like marriage. It has implications. Well, John MacArthur and these guys are from the old school. They grew up in a different America where all kinds of things were assumed by everybody, Democrat, Republican, Independent, everybody assumed that marriage is one man, one woman.
Right.
Everybody assumed that.
Even Bill Clinton did.
So, exactly. So you had that system where they could afford to just preach the gospel, because everybody agreed on this other stuff.
Right.
Well, now what's happened, and the reason for the social justice statement is a bunch of people said, yes, let's just preach the gospel, and the gospel entails racial reconciliation in the woke style.
Wow.
Or it presupposes
it's attached.
Soft socialism.
It starts going left. Right. The Robert Conquest law kicks in. And the social justice statement was a bunch of people from the old America saying, wait a minute. We don't want to go.
Let's make sure we all agree on this.
Let's make sure that we shore up our shared commitment.
That's really helpful.
And it's not going to, but that train's already left the station.
They're too late getting there.
I think it's too late. The one complaint I would have about the social justice statement is I think it's about 10 years too late.
But why is it too late?
Well, because now, in order to make it stick, you're going to have ruptured friendships, split churches, right? If it had been challenged at the front end, then I think you could have avoided the showdown that we're going to. I think
but whoever would have called it 10 years ago would have been someone crazy from the Monkey House, right?
Well, you're looking at the guy. That's what I'm saying.
Sorry, no, I didn't. I wasn't saying that about you.
Cross balancing.
But see, you just made me call Doug a crazy monkey.
Well, don't call me no. But here's the deal, though. Seriously, as I've watched, guys, right now I am hugely encouraged and excited because it's the first time since I've been reformed 15, 20 years that I see guys really digging deep into God's law, trying to figure out how they answer questions on the issue, which 10 years ago, when I was talking about theonomy and God's law and God's standard, everybody was looking at me crazy, except for one conversation, socialism. Then they were trying to figure out, what does the Bible say about the poor?
Right.
Because Jim Wallace was coming in and he was saying, hey guys, the Bible says stuff about the poor. And he was twisting it to kind of meet his, now all of a sudden people that's actually what made me become a theonomist, was like, wait, if God's law applies to the issue of and money and the poor and the church and people, well, then it applies all the way around.
Yeah, you can't just cherry pick through the Old Testament where you're like an N.T. Wright Jubilee year theonomist.
Right.
Where, so
Leviticus 25.
The Old Testament law applies if we're going to forgive third world debt. Well, the Old Testament teaches all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so we need to have a Bible study, and we need to say we need a full-orbed confessional engagement with the world as it is, such that our conservative politics needs more of a foundation than simple traditional Americanism.
Man.
It needs to be biblically grounded.
And that's what I thought the social justice statement was I thought it was soft, But, personally, I was like, man, this is soft. But the reason I signed it was like,
it's going the right direction.
That's right. Yeah. I like where the train is going.
Right.
So wait,
exactly.
I got a question here. There's a couple things that you've said in your ministry. When I first moved to Moscow in 2002, I remember, you've said this a million times, but when I first heard it from you, when I moved here, you said, we need to make sure we have no problem Bible verses.
No problem passages.
Yeah, no problem passages. And it's assumed in the Christian faith, but no one talks about it. And when you said that, it just really hit me hard. And then secondly, you wrote a book on how to biblically process and understand slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was up on campus at University of Idaho, 2002, 2003. A whole controversy blew up around that.
Yeah.
And I remember the story. The reason why you wrote the book was because you were watching a debate. I think actually it was with Jerry Falwell and some Anglican or Episcopalian gay bishop or something. And the bishops was arguing pro-homosexuality, and Jerry Falwell was against it. And the bishop said, well, slavery's in the Bible. Slavery's okay in the Bible. And Jerry Falwell's argument to slavery was, well, that was then. That was back then. Yeah. And now slavery's gone and this is now. But that was the bishop's whole basis for saying homosexuality should be okay now.
It was wrong
right?
then,
it was
now
wrong
it's
then,
okay.
Yeah, and so basically, two sides can play that game.
Right.
If you start saying, well, that was then, this is now, and you don't make a concerted, serious theonomic attempt to exegete all of the scriptures in a way that takes into account the incarnation, the transformation of the covenant. Right. You take
the logic
newness,
of the gospel,
the newness of the new covenant.
You take everything into account, but it's the sweep and flow of all of redemptive history, and it's all of the Bible for all of life, all of Christ for all of life.
Yeah.
If you do that, then you can be taken seriously. If you don't do that, then you're just going to be buffeted about by various political winds. You're just going to be...
and you're going to have embarrassing passages of the Bible.
Right. And so the prevailing winds are leftward now. Mm-hmm. But that's the prevailing wind, and that's why Christians are being blown in that direction. And the Christians who don't want to go there are going to need a better foundation than simply their grandmother's traditional Americanism.
Yeah.
They need to ground it in the Word. So if you say, what do you have to say about socialism? Why is socialism not biblical? I'd say, well, thou shalt not steal.
Right.
Yeah, right. It doesn't say thou shalt not steal except by majority vote, or thou shalt not steal unless there's a consensus.
And in 1 Samuel, Samuel warns the people that if you get a king, you might get taxed
10%.
Up to 10%.
And we would
that'd be incredible.
Someone who ran for president on a 10% ticket would be thought of as a radical libertarian.
Yeah.
So we need to ground what we're saying, everything in Scripture. What we think about economics, what we think about marriage, what we think about life issues, what we think about racial issues,
and slavery,
everything in the Scriptures with no embarrassment.
Right. And one thing that the Bible actually, probably you can almost summarize the whole Scriptures up as a theology of freeing slaves.
Yes.
We have to have a theology of slavery and a theology of freeing slaves.
But where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty.
Yeah.
So the gospel is the gospel of liberty. People are enslaved politically because they're slaves to their sins. And if you preach the gospel in the full gospel, not the charismatics, not the charismatics full gospel, but the total gospel, the total Christ, totus Christus. If you're preaching the whole thing, then what you're preaching is liberation. It's true liberation theology, not leftist liberation theology.
So you got John MacArthur and Al Mohler in the room, just you three hashing this out. What would you say to them?
I would say, John. Hi.
Thanks for sitting here with me.
I would say, John, I love your instincts. I think your instincts are that something's deeply, profoundly wrong here, and I love your instincts, and I applaud your instincts. Let's ground those instincts in overt exegesis, so that we have a biblically grounded case for this.
His stuff in the Q&A I thought was actually really great. I mean, the comment he made about the current culture inventing new victims, new oppressed peoples and suffering peoples.
Yeah, that's right.
And particularly to the end that for grasping political power.
and his awareness that abortion is the cornerstone issue and all of this. Yeah. Abortion is the progressives' bloody sacrament. Right. That's their
And his point was that particularly in some contexts, there's conservative black folk want to talk about oppression, racial prejudice, and don't want to bring up abortion.
Right.
And his point being, no, if we're going to talk about oppression of black people, let's talk about abortion.
But I think the guys who I think he would probably list, they actually are.
What?
Talking about abortion.
But I think that his point, though, is I think at least
the social justice movement maybe of itself in
I think
general.
some of them, though, are softening that. I think they're saying that's more of a political issue sometimes, not on the panel.
I think the most conservative guys in this.
Well, there's all white guys on the panel.
Yeah. Was there a black guy there?
No, Bodie was there, wasn't he?
He was on the premises.
Didn't Gracie just hire Daryl Bernard Harrison?
No.
Okay.
He was there too, wasn't he?
Anyways. Maybe he blended into that multi-ethnic crowd. Anyway. But one of the things, though, is that they're not, I think they're trying to bring both up. I think they're trying to say.
I think that's what they're trying to do. I grant that they're trying to do that, but I thought MacArthur's point is that I think there is a pressure.
Okay, I know I'm going to get in trouble here.
Let me bring it down to the point. The issue is not the abstract. Remember, I said you don't have wispy error appear at your door. It's always embodied in there's somebody associated with it. So if you said, Deaver said, you can't be in our church and be pro-choice. Right. And, I was grateful for that kind of strong stand. Strong stand. But if you're talking to people that you're worried about putting them off with signing the statement, I would say, how about can you be a black family in this church and have an Obama bumper sticker on your car?
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Because so Obama is a radically pro-choice presidential candidate.
Right.
And if you're a black if you're a black married couple in the United States, I'll flip it around. If you're a black child, you have far more to be worried about from the abortionist's forceps than you do with some cop pulling you over when you get your driver's license,
especially in New York.
Especially in New York.
Especially in New York. So
as Mohler pointed out.
So and kudos to him for doing that. Yeah. So these guys are all pro-choice, but pro-life. But excuse me, they're all pro-life. But I don't think that they see how the broad agenda, the pro-choice agenda, is
and that's what I'm trying to get
attaching itself to other issues.
I think what I'm trying to say is that I appreciate that I think he's right about that, because we've had to fight on some of this. But I think and Mohler tried to do this. I think he tried to say, but John, you can't just talk about this. Like you say, they're just talking about this and not talk about that.
Do you have that clip?
Where he
Prescott Bush?
I didn't grab that whole. That was a long clip. Yeah, there's a part where he actually lays out.
He talks about Jesse Jackson running for president as pro-life, and then brings up Prescott Bush.
So if you're looking at the issue of African Americans and abortion, remember that when Jesse Jackson emerged as an activist, he was not only anti-abortion, but was making the argument that abortion is genocide of unborn black babies. That all changed when he ran for president and accepted the rules of the Democratic nomination process.
And then he goes on and says, but if we're going to say that, we need to say also the fact that I think he calls them liberal white Republicans in the 50s and 60s were promoting abortion
and Planned Parenthood
in order to get rid of unwanted people groups.
Right.
And among them was Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's
dad, grandfather,
one of the major funders of Planned Parenthood. And, and he qualifies and says, I know the Bushes themselves were pro-life, but we have to recognize that this is sort of in our
and that
DNA.
And that is in line with the original strategy of Planned Parenthood. What was Planned Parenthood for? Well, part of it was getting rid of unwanted elements. It was
Margaret Sanger wanted to get rid of particularly the black race.
Yeah, so it was part of the broad eugenics,
social Darwinism
movement. So yes, we need to be biblical across the waterfront.
Okay, I want to talk about this so much more, but I really have to ask this question. One of the things that Al Mohler said, and we don't have time to play the clip. Man, we have so many clips we didn't play. I'm glad we have them. But one of the things that Al Mohler says is the difference between Jim Wallace, who was talking about social justice stuff 20 years ago, is the fact that they didn't have an anchored theology to talk about. They just talk about the social justice stuff. They weren't orthodox. They weren't orthodox in their theology.
Right.
But right now we have guys who are orthodox in their theology, but their feet are planted here with us, but their hands and their feet and their head is over there.
Yeah, and I would say it's the same thing with the leftists of a generation ago. They presented themselves as evangelicals,
as orthodox.
Yeah, we're orthodox. We'll sign your statement of faith, and we smelled a rat, rightly.
Yeah.
And so later
Which
on,
liberals are you talking about?
Well, it'd be people like Wallace, Jim Wallace, and Ron Sider, and people like that.
So
where it wound up, like Peter Enns was far more orthodox sounding when he was still at Westminster than after the fact. And who's that other guy in Grand Rapids? Love Wins.
Rob Bell.
Rob Bell was far more orthodox sounding early on.
Initially,
right. And then so we see the problems develop, and I think it's identical, more orthodox sounding.
And so you're saying you think, to answer his question, so Mohler would seem to push back and say, no, they were giving indications that they were soft at the time, and you're saying I don't think it was actually that clear.
I don't think it was either.
I think they actually were affirming their orthodox credentials,
just like now.
So that's what it is. Just like now, if you look at that stage, we're at the beginnings of where they were.
Yes,
20, 30 years ago.
Exactly, but it's with guys who were fighting against them.
Right.
So how are we supposed to be able to decipher the difference? Because we don't know. It could be anybody on that stage, really.
Yeah, what matters is the root, but the fruit that you use to, I call this the centrality of peripherals. Right.
That's clear.
That's clear. The root is what matters, but the fruit that you test the root with is out at the edges of the branches. And without a full-orbed theonomic Christian worldview, you can't really test the fruit.
Okay, so right now,
how do you test the fruit?
Yes. Yeah. How do I test the fruit?
You taste it. Man, this is communism.
Well, isn't that what Phil was trying to get after? Is like, Mohler, you've been silent, and look at the guys who have been coming out of. I mean, SBC isn't doing so well. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Al Mohler rules the SBC with an iron fist.
Well, I think he's being pushed. I think he.
Oh, really?
I think Al Mohler is hanging on, maneuvering at Southern, but he doesn't rule the SBC. I think the SBC is
bigger than that.
Way bigger than that.
This issue of social justice, I mean, it's tying in slavery to being pulled over by cops to
Me Too
to now it's the LGBT movement attached itself to it in some ways. As a pastor, how do you kind of sort through all this sin and all these wrong ways of trying to articulate and deal with the issue and give people clarity about this issue?
And maybe specifically, like, think about Duncan saying, I mean, he's trying to sort through this. He's trying to say, okay, I want to stand on the word of God. I don't want to curry favor with the world. But he's trying to separate. He said LGBT stuff. He did this in his T4G talk as well last year. You want to say, like, I want to say no there. But I want to say yes to the racial problems.
Yeah.
But anybody who's been blind on something for 30 years, I can't trust.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you the truth.
But how do you exhort pastors to address this mess?
The basic strategy that I've pursued is don't you try to solve everybody else's problem. You be the problem. So
that's not helpful.
I don't think you said that right.
I said something helpful.
I said that exactly. So instead of trying to put out everybody else's fires, you be the fire that they have to worry about putting out.
What kind of fire do you mean?
Just if you don't complain to them about not teaching the whole counsel of God, you teach the whole counsel of God. So I don't want to go around and chase people trying to make them preach a certain way. I want to preach that way, and have them have to deal with it.
Yeah,
come on now.
And preaching a certain way, you mean let's go verse by verse through the Bible
and apply it all,
and whatever it says,
believe,
say it.
And
it says, masters, treat your slaves.
Yeah. So let's say I'm in an association with a squishy, soft pastor over there, right? Rather than try to fix his squishiness.
Yeah.
What I want to do is just preach the word.
Right.
Preach the word, and he's got to worry about his association with me, not my association with him.
Is he want to sign your statement,
right,
or not by being associated with you? I have one more thing I want to.
Well, actually, I also want to get to Mohler. I think Mohler's test of fellowship, because I think everybody says like this isn't necessarily an issue of, they're not. I think what scared everybody there was what Mohler says in clip L.
Just last year at both the Gospel Coalition and Together for the Gospel, I was hearing some rhetoric that actually I first heard from Jim Wallace and Sojourners 20, 30 years ago. And so I think what I'm asking you is, in fact, what I am asking you is, do you not see that the evangelical movement, even our constituency, the most conservative end of the evangelical movement, is becoming a little more susceptible to that?
But Phil, you've known me for a long time. You know the answer to the question is yes, but I'm not going to be forced into a situation before thousands of people in which I have to say I'm going to do it your way. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm just not. And if that's
Fair
a test
enough.
of fellowship amongst us, this will be a good time to find out.
If that's a test of fellowship among us, now would be a good time to find out.
I think that scared everybody because, and I think rightly so, I think Mohler figures, he's thinking so far ahead in some sense to me that he's understanding just how essential this conversation is.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's like, it's not that important, guys. Oh, Mohler, you didn't have to go that far. Yeah, he did. It is that serious. And John MacArthur jumps in right after that and says, hey, let me jump in here. I don't want to fight with my friends. But
Right.
Mohler's like, but it's that serious.
Yep.
And so I just want to say, like, is Mohler tripping here, or is he actually the only person in the room that might figure out that this really might be a test of fellowship?
Oh, I think it very basically when I said earlier the fault lines have appeared.
Yeah.
I think that Mohler sees that.
Yeah.
And he's seeing that other people are starting to see that, and he's thinking of it as a way, his strategy for attacking the leftism. He's thinking, I've got a different strategy. I'm not doing it your way.
Right.
I'm doing what you're doing.
Right. He says, I agree with your concerns. I'm doing it my way.
Right. So I think I've got a better strategy for dealing with this leftward drift.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm happy to take him at his word. He's a hero of mine.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take him at his word that that's what he thinks he's doing.
Yeah.
Right. But he sees more clearly than anybody else up there.
I think so.
The nature of the fault lines.
Yep.
Yes.
I think so. Absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. So I just want to ask you about, woke.
Woke.
Just as we're closing. This is from Eric Mason's book, the book that it's called Woke Church. Lig Duncan wrote the foreword, and says in the foreword that it was based on some comments he made at his T4G talk in 2018, based on, what would he say? Something like,
it's for the last 30 years, I've had a blindness over my eyes about this whole situation.
About racial relations and so on. So he says, this is what Eric Mason says.
By the way.
He says, Pan-Africanists and black nationalists use the term woke to refer to no longer being naive nor in mental slavery. And we have borrowed the term and redeemed it to be used in the context of being awakened from deadened sinful thinking. In fact, every believer has been awakened from sin's effects and Satan's deception, Ephesians 5:14. Thus, the believer is able to be aware of sin and challenge it wherever it is. So woke is a word commonly used by those in the black community as a term for being socially aware of issues that have systemic impact. This social awareness doesn't come from just watching the news or reading history through a traditional lens. Being woke has to do with seeing all the issues and being able to connect cultural, socioeconomic, philosophical, historical, and ethical dots. What's wrong with being woke?
Well, what you're doing is you're tagging a Bible verse on. Awake, O sleeper. I think that's the verse they're talking about.
Ephesians 5:14.
Awake, O sleeper. So you're taking a Bible verse that says waking up is a good thing, right? And then you apply it to the definition of connecting all the dots.
The world's definition.
As supplied by the world, right? And so we are to be woke to the temptation of worldliness, but Pan-Africanism and that whole thing is one of the temptations.
Right.
It's not part of the It's not part of the solution.
Yeah.
So
it's like taking and if I understand you right, it's saying these movements are actually endarkenments.
Yes.
They're like falling asleep.
It's going to sleep.
It's going to sleep.
Well,
and let's name going to sleep waking up.
Right.
And put a Bible verse on it.
And so the problem when he says we borrowed the term, we repurposed the term.
Right.
Redeemed it.
We redeemed it. I would say, okay, what process did you go through
to redeem that?
To redeem that. What did you get rid of?
Right.
What have you rejected?
Right.
Out of all the things that in the normal secular use of woke, what have you rejected?
Right.
What have you thrown away? What have you damned as false gospel?
Right.
What have you? And the answer is well, they wouldn't be able to give you a list.
Right. And so back to your point earlier in terms of like checking the fruit.
Right.
If people want to follow this and say, well, I don't know, Doug, maybe you're being too jumpy about this. They could grab Eric Mason's book,
right?
Read the book, Woke Church, and ask the question you just asked.
Right.
What about the world's definition of woke did you damn?
Right.
Which part of it did you chuck?
Yeah.
Right.
Did you
That's a good
actually
question.
filter it out?
Yep.
Right.
Or did you just assume their standards?
Yeah, don't say we ran the term through our filters. I would say, let me check the filters and see what it caught.
Yeah. Let me see your homework.
Let me see what it did.
Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the things that really bothers me about this term is that don't we have words already in the Christian faith that mimic being born again, like regeneration?
Yeah.
And then also, if you look at Lazarus, when he was dead and God brought him back to life, regenerated him, he still had to have his clothes taken off. So there's a point of sanctification. These traditional reformers that we've always had.
Yeah.
I don't understand why all of a sudden, we need some new words.
Last point on this. The term doesn't have any impact in your life. If you've not been woke for 30 years like Lincoln Duncan has,
But you've been regenerated, but you just haven't been woke.
But it doesn't mean anything when you actually become woke.
Yeah.
Right.
Like if you're teaching theology for 30 years at your seminary and then you just now realize that you've been a racist.
Wokeness is the enemy of regeneration, if you ask me. Anyway,
Yeah.
Pastor Wilson, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate
Yeah.
you. If you're
Good
single,
time as always.
if you're single, get married. If you're married, have kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until next week, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic. I don't think we got you in enough trouble.
I know.
I thought that was too easy of a show.
I think that was.
Things are changing in the culture and in the church. Issues of race and justice have polarized many of us. And we're left wondering at least these two questions. How did we get here? And why is God allowing this to happen? Well, the answer can be found on a project called The Appendix by Pastor Kirk Kennedy. This is an album and documentary. The Appendix can be found at the iTunes Store, Amazon, and wrathandgrace.com.
Wrath and Grace.